everybody. Welcome to the Free Your Soma podcast. Today, we are exploring personal evolution and collective evolution, and how does our evolution relate to our habits, our intuition, and to our somatic experience. I'll be talking with David Knox from the Evolutionary Life, and we're going to explore some really exciting, out there, but grounded topics today. So stay tuned. Every day there is a forgetting, and every moment there is the possibility of remembering. Remembering who you truly are, awakening to your body, to the inner world, to the experience of being alive. Here is where you find the beauty, the joy, and here is where you free your soma. I'm your host, Amy Takaya. I'm here to help you move from pain to power, from tension to expansion, and ultimately from fear to love. Hi, David. How are you today?
Hey, Amy, it's so good to be here. How are you?
Yeah, just cruising right along. It's a Friday, and we're recording here on a Friday, so it's kind of like the end of the journey of the week, and I'm feeling that
Oh,
Friday energy, and really excited to have this conversation with you. We've got some exciting things to talk about, right? Um,
yeah,
and particularly this idea of evolution from the standpoint that you talk about it, right? Your podcast is called The Evolutionary, right? With
yeah,
David Knox, and you really are taking some of these concepts to, I would say, like, a quantum level, but then also talking about it from an everyday internal, somatic experience of how does this actually relate to how we live our lives and how we experience our reality in our bodies. And those are things that
absolutely.
I've heard you talking about. And I'm like, this is somatic. Sometimes people aren't using that word, but they are talking about something that is this holistic picture of what it means to be a human.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons that I had you on my show was because there's a lot of very interesting overlap. You're very much working where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, in terms of the human experience.
Mm. Yeah, excellent. Well, maybe we can start off with kind of a general question to orient our listeners who might not, fully, maybe they've heard about evolution from like a Darwinian perspective and all this stuff, but maybe they're not familiar with the way that you talk about it. So let's start with that. How do you define evolution, right? And how is it relevant to our daily lives?
Yeah. So that's a beautiful question and a wonderful place to start. It's also a big question because evolution is, when I speak about evolution on the show, I'm speaking about evolution in the most general sense. I am speaking about Darwinian or not Darwinian evolution, depending on where you, what your mindset is there or your belief systems. I'm also talking about cosmological evolution. I'm talking about the evolution of systems, everything, right? Because we live in an evolutionary system. And so what happened was I was living my life. And by the way, I started reading like Deepak Chopra and Wayne Dyer back in the early 90s and like kind of got into that manifestation culture that is pretty well entrenched now. It's quite
Mm.
a big industry. It's quite a big mindset and movement. But a couple of things were happening to me that kind of came to a head about 5 years ago. And the first thing was that there was some inconsistency in my manifestation practice. I was doing the same thing for one thing and it would come easily and quickly, and I would be doing the same thing for something else and it's just not showing up. And I think that everyone that tries this modality has that experience, right? I think it's very common. And I couldn't like grasp why that was happening. And at the same time, I was having this massive cognitive dissonance that I know everyone is going to relate to, and that is I'm working on my life. And by the way, it was good. My life has been pretty stellar since about 42 years old, and I'm in my 50s now. And I'm stellar, but there's something missing. And one of the things that was really bothering me was that what is the context for my life?
Mm.
The context for my life is the greater environment. It's the world. And in my opinion, at the time, the world was like a fire in a madhouse. I mean, turn on the news for 5 seconds. It's a recipe for mental health issues.
Mm.
And so I'm supposed to create my perfect life in this context that is so imperfect. And well, that kind of didn't make sense. It felt like making tea while the house is on fire, you know? So that so what can I do? Shouldn't I be doing something?
Mm.
And what is that thing that I should be doing? And so there came a moment where I realized that there was kind of one thing that pulled that all together. And I was kind of taken with this idea that has gained some popularity in science now, and that is that we live in a holographic fractal universe. Holographic meaning that the information of the whole system is available at every point in the system, meaning
Mm-hmm.
another way to say that would be like the information in the universal mind, the knowing of the universal mind is available everywhere,
Yes.
including to you and me. And
Interconnectedness.
absolutely. And the other piece, the fractal piece says that the information or the equation or the pattern that makes the whole system also makes everything in the system.
Mm.
So in other words, our nature is its nature. And the one thing that I noticed that all of the scientific disciplines seemed to agree upon is that we live in a whole, or that we live in an evolutionary system, that the universe
Mm.
is evolutionary. Ask any scientific discipline, and they will say, yeah, everything seems to be evolving. And so it occurred to me that if that's its nature and it's our nature, then, and by the way, there's intelligence in the system, there's intention in the system, there's consciousness in the
Mm.
system, right? I don't think that probably most of your listeners will not be subscribing to the idea that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of biological life,
Right. And
that
that it's
there's
all random or something, right?
right, and that there's right that everything happened on accident. That's statistically that's a joke. I mean, there's so many people, very smart people, statisticians, mathematicians, other scientists are blowing holes in that theory constantly because it's almost a flat out impossibility that this is a mistake, right? And so there's consciousness and intention, and Schrodinger, one of the fathers of quantum physics, said something along the lines of there's only one consciousness in the universe. To refer to consciousness in the plural
Mm.
is erroneous. And which means that we are having this experience of being separate, but we're not. Our consciousness is embedded in the consciousness of the universe and probably lots of layers in between. Doesn't matter. I don't know. Right. But just to understand that there's that intentionality in the universe. And so if we live in an evolutionary system, then the mind in which we are embedded will be driving us to evolve.
Mm.
And I woke up and I went, okay, I'm focused in on my manifestation practice. And my manifestation practice is about circumstances. It's about bringing things into my life and circumstances and relationships and, outward trappings, right? And the universal mind in which I am embedded is focused on my becoming.
Mm.
It's focused on my evolution. And so we're playing two different games. And as soon as I realized that, I went, oh my God. So if I shift my focus over to the same thing, that the organizing intelligent principle in which I am embedded, that in which I was created and sustained and returned to, that thing, if we're focused on the same thing, life gets a whole lot easier. And
Mm.
so that missing piece in my manifestation practice kind of like opened up and I went, holy smokes. It's just that simple. Just shift it over. And instead of asking to get stuff and asking to create circumstances, I started asking to become the person who naturally attracts
Yes.
and sustains those circumstances.
Mm.
Because once the becoming happens, then the rest, that's the effortless part. The
Yeah.
effort is the becoming, right? And
Yeah.
so that was kind of the thing that happened. And the other part of that realization, the second part of it, was the other thing that I was struggling with, which was that cognitive dissonance of living in a chaotic, what I was viewing at the time as a chaotic world. And what can I do? I'm one person out of
Mm.
7.8 whatever billion people, right? What can I do to help?
Mm.
Should I go on protest or sign petitions or recycle or what is the thing that you should do? All those things are great, whatever. But there's a very fundamental thing that I can do. And it's the same thing I just described,
Yes.
and that is evolve. because the thing that is going to save the human race, the thing that is going to save the planet, is the evolution of the human species. It's the
Mm,
upleveling of the consciousness of the human species. Nothing else is going to save us.
right.
We have, right? We have to evolve into a species that is beyond violence, into a species that is in harmony with ourselves and with each other and with our environment.
Yeah.
And I actually, I think this is a consistent thought in the great spiritual traditions, is that I actually only have one thing that I can do there,
Mm,
and that's evolve me.
yes.
That's my game. You can't make me evolve. Try as you will. I can't, I can't make you evolve. I can't make anybody evolve. There's no
Right,
amount of
right.
evangelism or knocking on doors or whatever that is going to get other people to evolve.
Hmm.
That's a personal game. And so one of the kind of mantras of the show that I'm not particularly proud of is focus on your own shit.
Yeah. No, I
Because
love that.
that's right. That's all we have to, that's the only lever we have to pull there.
Hmm.
But and that sounds like bad news because there's only one of me. But the actual news there is that my evolution or your evolution has a tremendous impact on the field of humanity,
Yes.
right? This idea of a morphic field, that there's an organizing principle to the molecules that make up us, this physical meat suit, right? What is that? Well, that, whatever that is, there's one for humanity as well. And so
Mm,
the morphic field of humanity and the morphic field of you there is inseparable. And so
yeah.
you have a direct line in to pump that field with as much light and consciousness and awareness and love and compassion as you can. It can take all of it. And it doesn't
Absolutely.
take, and that's the good news, is that we don't have to have 51% or 5% or 3% or whatever. We just have to have enough love and light and energy in the system, and awareness, consciousness in the system. And, the definition of consciousness is a whole nother conversation because it gets used a lot.
Right,
But
right.
to up level the entirety of humanity, because we all share the same field.
Yeah.
And so those two things come together at once. And all of a sudden I went, oh, okay, that's starting to make sense. And then I started using it, and it started to actually make changes in my life.
Did you know that your muscles are holding on to thoughts, memories, and feelings? If you have a tight neck or back, you're not just getting old, you're experiencing a buildup of tension from the life you've lived. Most people don't know this, but there is a part of your brain that can reverse and prevent chronic tension. When you relax your muscles, you not only move better and regulate your nervous system, but you also free yourself from the grip the past has over your body. So you can live with freedom, confidence, and enjoy your life now. How does that sound? Join me, Amy Takaya, and discover what my clients are raving about at youcanfreeyoursoma.com. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I'm picking up everything you're putting down. This is fantastic. I feel you on the, when we are focused on getting things and having things versus who we are being and how we are doing things, right? There's a how to how we do everything, and
Yeah.
you can be doing doing some action, you can be doing something. And if you're doing it with, you know, force and struggle and resentment and frustration, and you're doing it out of anger or you're doing it out of guilt or to punish yourself, it's a very different experience. And your body, your nervous system is going to have a very different reaction to doing that thing than if you were to do it in a way that is, this is helping me grow as a human being, extending yourself compassion, extending yourself understanding, right? Doing whatever it is that you're doing and doing it in a way that is thoughtful and therapeutic, right? So the how we do stuff is incredibly important. And that speaks to that intention, right? And where you're putting your focus and who you are being rather than what you're doing, right? And all the actions that we could take, right? It's the how is incredibly important. The other thing you're speaking to here that I think is wonderful is, you're talking about things energetically, but another way to kind of talk about this, because it's all part of the same field, is our nervous system. And whenever
Mhm.
you're interacting with a person, you're interacting with their nervous system. And this is an invisible thing you can't see or feel, but you can in a way because you're seeing the expression on their face. You're hearing the tone of their voice, their body language. There's a lot of information that your nervous system is picking up on. and your nervous systems are interacting with each other. And if somebody is really, dysregulated and stressed out, you feel
Mm-hmm.
that stress, and if you have those spaces in your auric field that are, vulnerable to stress, right? There's something going on with you. You can get triggered, right? That's what we call it, right? We call getting like, oh, and now I'm affected by this person's stress, and now I'm walking around carrying that stress, and some of it's mine, but some of it's theirs. And now my
Right.
nervous system took that on, and now I'm not sleeping well, right? And now we're
Mm-hmm.
in this cycle of how is this affecting my daily life? And what I just described is 99% unconscious. We don't realize that it's happening when it's happening. It's usually only in retrospect, often for me, like when I started working with people like myself who could actually help me kind of like recognize the impact of my parents' nervous system on my nervous system, of my
Mm-hmm.
previous partner's nervous system on my nervous system, and how if I don't kind of, like you said, deal with my shit, right? It's accumulating. I'm not only accumulating the things that I've experienced, but I'm accumulating, the transpersonal karma, the transpersonal trauma of other people. And so this, what I'm describing is kind of what you described in the inverse, which is that as we heal ourselves and as we learn to regulate our own nervous system, right? Then when I come in contact with a person who's dysregulated, what if instead of being triggered and thrown off by that, I'm a calmer person than they are? And they get to experience nervous system to nervous system what it's like to be calm, what it's like
Mm-hmm.
to be at peace, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have a moment where they feel soothed, and it maybe just be a little blip of a moment because of the tone of my voice, because of how I'm responding rather than reacting, and they get just this little blip of a moment where they're like, oh, maybe everything's okay, maybe I'm okay, you know maybe there's hope.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
that way that it's impacting everybody you come in contact with when you focus on your own shit, right?
Totally. And part of what you're speaking to is this idea of curating our own consumption, because everything
Mm.
that you come into contact with, everything that comes through any of your five senses, as well as your additional senses, and you're talking about, your nervous system is, so we're going to talk about intuition later on, right? Curating your own consumption is so important because you're affected by that. You're affected by the media that you intake in all ways, the games that you play, the people that you come into contact with, the person sitting next to you at the bar that you're not even talking to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all being aware of that and taking control of that, especially when you start this evolutionary journey, because, how strong are you? How stable are you in your light and love that you're emitting?
Mm. How
Uh,
grounded.
how grounded can you be? And as you become what you're describing, as you become more evolved and more secure in who you are and in your ground of being, then you can actually go out and start emanating and
Mhm.
overriding some of those and actually impacting other people. And some people aren't going to be impacted, and you need to move away from them.
Yeah, they're not ready
And
for it. They're not, that's not an alignment for them yet.
yeah, and recognizing that early and making the adjustment is absolutely vital.
Yeah, yeah. I like to call it your radiance. Yeah, that's actually what I called my 6 month program to like get the somatic awareness. It's you start
Yes.
radiating, and you said emanating. That's another really great word for it. But it's a process to get to that point where you're, like you said, grounded and stable enough in your own person, in your own energy, that you're not just, hairline triggered by every person that you're coming in contact with who's got some shit that is unresolved, and it, you know, grabs your unresolved shit and they start like an energetic battle, right?
Yeah.
It's time. It takes time and a process, and we're never perfect at it. It's a practice, right? So I love that. And we're going to talk a little bit now about like habits. And in a way, like our habits are what we practice. Your habits will become your future if you are unaware of what you're doing on a daily basis, in and day out, with your time, your energy, your resources, right? That is going to have a consequence over time. And so, kind of like you said, like when we can sort of what's the word you used for your consumption? What was the word?
Curate it.
Curate your consumption. When you can start to look at, what am I spending my time doing? What am I spending my resources and my energy doing? And what am I getting back from that? Are these things that are really serving me and my body and my life, or are these things that are draining me? Right. So I would love to talk about habit formation. I know you have a lot of experience with this, and let's
What would you say if someone's got a habit that they recognize is not serving them? What are some ways that they could start shifting towards a way towards things that would serve them?
Yeah, well, the first thing to do is kind of understand the role of habits in all of this, because a lot of people, they have this idea that there's habits that they need to break. There's this feeling that that's probably not good for me or whatever. But it's just kind of haphazard, right? Understanding the role of habits. First of all, habits get a bad rap. You know, people talk about breaking habits all of the time, and they feel like a lot of their habits are bad because 95% of what we do, from what the pundits say, 95% of our day is lived on autopilot. So
Mm-hmm.
95% of what we think, feel, say, and do is initiated subconsciously. And maybe we're somewhat aware while we're doing it, but that's most of our life. That's staggering. Now, you could look at that and go, oh, habits are bad. And so I'm going to become a master of mindfulness. And by the way, my partner, Kitty, teaches mindfulness. And so it's kind of constantly in my life, in my daily thing. But you don't have to go all that to that length, right? You can actually recognize that habits are a good thing if you use them properly. In fact, they're a super powerful tool to get moving on your evolutionary track. And so before you start how am I going to change these habits? The first thing to do is to ask, well, what am I going to use to decide what habits I'm going to go after and what I'm going to replace them with? And what am
Mm.
I going to replace them with? Super important, because you don't just stop doing something. You replace it, right? Anyone who's tried to get rid of any sort of addiction, cigarettes, coffee, you name it knows this, that you don't just stop, you have to replace it. That makes it so much easier. But what are you going to go after? Because if 95% of our day is habit, and this is not only what we do, it's all the words that we speak, the emotions that we feel, and the thoughts that we think. Those are real things, right? Those are the most important stuff. Well, so the first thing that we have to do in the evolutionary model is we got to figure out what is our vision for
Mm.
the life that we would like to create. What is our vision for the world that we want to live in, the context for that life, right? Can we spend some time on a regular basis cultivating that vision? It's incredibly important to do. And once we have that, and it's not a one-time thing, it's something that we kind of spend time with on a weekly basis, is what is my vision for my life that I want to live in context of the world I would like to live it in? Then we have a North Star. And of course, in the evolutionary model, we also change that from this is the circumstances of the life that I would like to live into what is the person that would live that life? Who is that
Mm.
person? And turn me into that person. That's my intended becoming, right? And so now I have a North Star and I'm always navigating toward that no matter what. And then that gives me something to hold up my habits against. And I look at my habits and go, is this serving the creation of that life? Is this serving my intended becoming?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And if it's not, it's a candidate. Maybe we'll go after that one. But again, it's a huge smorgasbord of habits to go after. So the most important thing is to choose one,
Mm-hmm.
not all of them, just one habit, because eh, habits are effortless. Replacing them is not. And so you don't want to overload yourself and go, I'm going to totally retool my life this week. Throw that out. Choose one. Make it a good one. Not too big. It has to be one that you feel like you can handle,
Mm.
and get into that one and take a couple of weeks, decide what would be a better thing to do. And maybe it's a lot of people go after their morning routine first, because morning routine is there's a lot written about it. People talk about it all the time. All of the
Yeah.
self-guru, self-help pundits and, success gurus and stuff, they're always talking about morning routine. Very important. Sets the tone for the day. Cool. Maybe take one of your morning activities or rituals, or maybe lack thereof, and replace that, and replace it with something that you believe is going to be
Mm.
supportive of the person you want to become, of the life that you'd like to lead. And then do that for, 3 or 4 weeks. Sometimes it only takes a couple of weeks. But as soon as it becomes habits, the beauty kicks in. When it becomes a habit, no more effort. Zero effort. It's habit. And now you can do another one. See, this is not a sprint. This is
Yeah.
this is the long haul. This is a way of life. And if you do this, for 5 or 6 months, and you just replace one at a time, patiently replace one at a time, be patient with yourself. It's always important to be nurturing and patient with yourself, and go ahead and do it and replace one at a time. And 6 months from now, if you choose well, 5 or 6 habits, your life is going to be very, very different. And after you get, 2 or 3 habits in, it's important to start looking at, I think it's important to start going after habitual ways of speaking and
Mm-hmm.
habitual ways of thinking, because these are so deeply powerful, and they're things that people often don't go after. They're like, I'm going to quit drinking caffeine, or I'm going to run every day, or whatever. That might sound hard, but it's a lot easier than changing the way you think, the
Mm-hmm.
thoughts that erupt into your head given a certain situation, right?
Yeah.
Someone cuts you off in traffic. What's your habitual way of thinking about that? That was a tough one for me for years, right? Is it compassion, or is it I want to kill them? Tough
Yeah.
one, or
Yeah.
somewhere on that spectrum somewhere. Um, so going after habitual ways of thinking and speaking are so important, because, as Mike Dooley has taught us for the last 30 years, thoughts become things. They're real things. They actually emanate out into the field in which we're contained, and they have repercussions that come back to us. Very important to be thinking about positive things, of looking for the things to be grateful for in your environment.
Yeah.
Um, and then, you know, words are magic, words cast spells, cast good ones, find some things that you're saying that don't line up with, they don't align to that North Star vision for your intended becoming, and pull that out. Like,
Yeah.
have a switch thought, have a switch phrase that you throw back in there and say it until it becomes habit. And then after it becomes habit, and then it starts reprogramming you subconsciously because you're saying it.
Absolutely. Yes. I work a lot with like habit reformation, just, on a muscular level with people, because it's all interconnected, as we've kind of said before. And,
Yeah.
our habitual ways of thinking, every thought that we have, we don't realize it. It comes with a micro contraction of our whole body. Our whole body is reacting to our thoughts and feelings. And then our environment, things that happen in our environment are reinforcing, because our brain is having those, it's called confirmation bias, where we're looking for evidence around us that this is true. And so we look around us for evidence that our belief systems are true and are accurate. And so then when we come in contact with certain things in the world, our brain is automatically looking for that bias and operating from that. And that also affects our physical body, and so that's how we end up in those stuck kind of patterns, those loop patterns, and for anybody who's lived with chronic pain, which was me, that can kind of feel like, oh, I'm just in this cycle of like, I start feeling a little bit better, and then something happens, and now I'm hurting again, or now I'm struggling again, and then something happens. And so when you are talking about this idea of, shifting a habit, I think about it somatically in terms of, it's going to be ideally, to get to the root of these things, it has to be something that we're working with from all levels, and meaning with our physical body as well. So that's where things like people are often, trying to shift habits around, like you said, coffee, or things that affect their physical body and their nervous system. It might be food habits, which I know was like a thing that we were going to talk about a little bit, about shifting your food habits. And these approaches, I would say, are kind of considered more bottom up, rather than like tackling the mindset, and programming our thoughts. That's more kind of like a bottom down, or like, let's change the thought and then everything will follow. Well, sometimes if we change our physiology, we notice that those thoughts that were gripping us don't have the same grip. Right? When my
Yeah.
body is calm and relaxed and my nervous system is more regulated, when I have a disruptive negative thought, right, it doesn't have the same impact on me as when I'm a little ball of stress and my body is tight and I'm, not getting the nutrition that I need, and all of these things that affect my physical body. So I'd say, like, part of what you're describing with, shifting habits is, how well have you developed a baseline to operate from that actually makes habit shifting not only possible, but easier than it is when we're all, out of dysregulated and not getting our needs met, our basic needs for, safety and nutrition and all of those things, right? So maybe we can hop a little bit into kind of a specific thing here, because I know you had some shifts around food, right? That you noticed impacted your experience of your body, but also of your mind and of your consciousness. Would you share a little bit about that kind of bottom up approach?
Yeah, you bet. And to speak to the approach of bottom up or top down, it's really difficult to actually tease these things out. I mean, it's a two-way street. And
Totally.
there were some guys, some scientists who put together the compendium of all of the facial emotions,
Mhm.
right? They like, I don't know, hundreds, like a couple of hundred actual distinct emotions and what they look like on the human face. And they put together the catalog of this. And I don't recall their names. They did it 30, 40 years ago. But one of the things that they noticed while they were doing it, because they'd be sitting around for hours together. Okay, so what does disgust look like? What does
Mhm.
joy look like? And all of these very specific emotions. And what they noticed was that it's a two-way street. When they'd be sitting around trying to put together horror, horror for a while, like, what does horror look like? They felt horrible,
Yeah.
right? They felt horrible in their body and in their emotionally they felt horrible. And so it's all a two-way street, right? Or three-way street, or however many inputs there are there. Um, so, but I had an experience when I was 42 where I changed my diet. And I changed it overnight and I changed it radically. And I went to
Mm.
eating whole foods vegan. And something very interesting happened. It's going to speak to what you're talking to here. And I had a feeling, I went through a process. There was a lot of purging, there was a lot of cleansing that went on. And I didn't feel well for a few weeks. And I stuck with it. And I got through that and I started to feel really good. And then I noticed one day, a couple months in, maybe a few months in, that there was a different feeling in the core of my body, in the core of my being. And what I recognized is that there had been a white noise there. There
Mm.
had been a physical feeling there, and that physical feeling was gone. And the physical feeling was something, I would call it the precursor to anxiety. It's
Mm.
not that I was stressed out, but I was almost stressed out. I had a feeling like there's something I should be stressing about. And that feeling went away. And I realized that I had been living with this for 42 years.
Mm.
And I went, oh my God. So what you're talking to here is that there is a foundational aspect. We're inhabiting this body. And anything that is disrupting our capability to live our best lives, we're going to talk about intuition in a minute. Intuition often comes through the body, through
Yeah.
the nervous system. And so if that is obfuscated by a lot of muscular tension and pain or other things, right, then that's going to be a headwind, a major headwind. In some cases, it'd be a flat out showstopper if we're
Yes.
trying to develop our intuition, let's say, which is the vital thing to do. We'll get into that. So that happened to me. And so when I heard you talking, on my show and before that, about the things you talk about, I went, that makes total sense because you take the whole idea of Hannah somatic therapy it's not just relieving muscle pain and tension. It's freeing up resources.
Yeah.
It's freeing up connectivity. It's freeing you up to live a better life. And I went, yeah, that makes total sense to me.
Yes. Yes. And when you start to shift one thing, it affects all these other things too. Kind of like, again, going back to that holographic universe, when one thing shifts, and we become aware of something and we start taking action and then we start feeling better and we start doing something about it. And then we get this little boon of confidence that, oh, maybe some other things in my world could shift. If this can shift, maybe there's other things that can shift. And that's how we kind of get on that momentum of evolution, of change, where we can have that confidence of having experienced our reality and our body's reality shifting, and then we see a way forward for other areas of our life, right? So it kind of accumulates this feeling of possibility when we start moving in that direction. And that's also related to intuition in the sense that once we start the practice of tapping in and noticing our intuition and noticing sometimes it's aligned with our thoughts and sometimes it's not. Sometimes our thoughts are giving us some other programming. I'd say most of the time our thoughts are it's almost like our thoughts are like the last to know and our body is the first to know, right? And then, it takes a moment. Sometimes for many people, there's like a lag between they experience something and they get a feeling and they're not really sure what that means. They're not really sure how they
Right.
feel. And then it takes them a little bit of time. Everybody's different. Some people, it takes them like maybe even like a week or two to process an interaction that they had or an experience that they had, that they got this feeling and they couldn't really figure out what it was. And then it's like a week later that they're like, oh, like I realized like my boundaries were being infringed upon. Like, oh, this didn't feel good. That's what was going on. That's what I was feeling in my body, was something not sitting right with me, and then
Yeah.
really the attendance to our intuition and the attendance to our somatic experience can start closing that gap, that lag time between like getting a feeling and then noticing what it is that this feeling is trying to tell you about what's happening around you or what's happening internally or about what kind of situation that you're in, right? So maybe now you can, talk a little bit about intuition and as it relates to this idea of living a more evolved and aligned life.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I guess the first thing I like to say is, why is intuition important?
Mm.
And the fact is we live in the information age, right? Which means that we also live in the disinformation age. Because if you go back, look at all the ages, Bronze Age, Iron Age, Industrial Age, Information Age now, what you see is that the main technology of the day was used to make our lives better. It was used to, find food better and be more successful at all of the things that make humans human. It was also used to wage war on each other. It was
Mhm.
also used to control each other. And the same thing is happening right now. And so we're in the information age. We're also in the disinformation age. There's information wars happening as we speak, and we're all being subjected to it. There's highly sophisticated, coordinated propaganda stuff going on
Mm.
constantly. And so it's much more important now than ever to develop our intuition so that we know what to pay attention to. And I would also say that, when we actually, in a few minutes, we'll talk about the role of intention in evolution. We're going to realize that the information wars that are happening are here for a reason,
Right.
and that it's actually a positive thing. But what you spoke to is really absolutely vital. Recognizing the first hit is there's a couple of ways to develop our intuition, and one of them is kind of the short game 101 kind of thing. And the other one is a bigger picture navigational device for our evolutionary path. And the first one is what you were talking to, and that is intuition. What is intuition? It's information that is coming to us in a way that doesn't fit into the materialist paradigm.
Mm. Mm.
Fair?
Yeah,
So,
that's
and
a
so
good way to put
that's a
it.
big blanket, right? That covers a lot. And so, if we're going to develop our intuition, it's helped to start with, it's helpful to narrow it down and go, okay, what am I going to look for? And so anytime that we are faced with something new, anytime we meet someone, anytime we have a decision point on something, we have an instant hit, right? We have an instant intuitive hit. It comes through our heart and our solar plexus, our three and our four. And if we can learn to recognize that, that's the one that's right. That's the one, if you subscribe to this idea of a morphic field, that's the one that is tied very closely in with the morphic field, senses out into the morphic field, and the morphic field is entangled with all of the other fields. And so it's getting rich, accurate information in real time.
Mm.
But what happens? Well, what happens is, you kind of described it, is we have a flash. It's a flash. It's right. It's our intuitive hit. And then it's gone because there's a dog pile of all
Mm.
kinds of 3D world stuff and modern training. There, our hopes and our dreams and our memories and our traumas and our analytical mind going, I need more info, I need more info, I need more info. They all jump on it and just totally cover it up. And we're left going, what was well, so if you're not trained, if you don't train yourself to
Mm.
really look for that hit, then it's so easy to miss.
Yeah.
And also training the body, opening up the body, freeing the body from all of the other things that are obfuscating its ability to sense that hit, right? So doing those things so that you can actually receive the hit and
Mhm.
recognize the hit is what you do in the 101 training. And then the tough part, then you have to trust it.
Yeah.
So I recognize a hit. Now I have to trust that hit, because half of the time or more, It goes completely against all of the rational analysis that we put on it.
Yeah.
And so learning to do that is the toughest part. But that's an important first step, because if you do that, what's going to happen is you're going to, if you're accurately recognizing that intuitive hit, then you're going to start and following it. Then you're going to start having results.
Mm.
You're going to start you're going to realize that it's right, and you're going to start to trust it. And that's a beautiful thing, because it is yourself. It
Yeah.
is your inner knowing. It is your connection with your higher self and with the field, and with the entanglement that
And
you
with your
have.
mission.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
With, right? And so if that mission is that vision that you've put together for yourself is truly vibrating with who you really are, then it's vibrating with your intention, and your intention is going to lead you in that direction. That's inevitable. And as you start to trust it, then you can go next level.
Mm.
And next level is you can start to put questions to it.
Mm.
You can, right? And so now you can really, really get down to the acceleration, down your evolutionary path, by putting questions to your intuitive knowing.
Yeah.
And this is so advanced because it really, really takes nerve and grit, because you start small, I would say, and work your way up to major life decisions. And if
Mm.
you want to change something, or you feel like there needs to be a change, then put it to that. And there's a process that I use for that. And that is, you, this is kind of it gives a little bit of time for the unfoldment of all of those intuitive hits to come in and let you know how a decision feels. And it's a really simple process. Let's say I've got two things to choose from, A and B. And even if it's big, the thing that you do is you make the decision. You go, I'm choosing A. I'm
Mhm.
choosing A, and that's all there is to it. And I'm done. B is not even in my awareness. I've chosen A. Just choose A. You don't have to tell anybody, but with every fiber of your being, choose A. And what happens is, we can't help but think forward into the future. We do it all the time. It's flat out impossible for us not to try, as much as, our mindfulness practice and meditation, trying to be in the present moment like you are with me now. Nice work. We're thinking into the future. And so if I
Mm.
make this decision that I'm going with A over the next few days, all of the implications will start to flood in.
Yeah.
And the right, because I'm thinking into the future. And as I think into the future, I'm thinking into the future with choice A,
Yes.
because B doesn't exist. I just choice A. That's all. I'm right there. And what the process then is to notice how I feel
Yes.
as those
Mhm.
implications reveal themselves, as I'm sitting around doing my day, I'm in the shower, I'm eating breakfast, whatever, and those thoughts are coming in. How does that feel? And you're going to get a really pretty clear feeling of what decision A feels like in your life.
Yeah. It feels like in
And
your body.
absolutely, it's a holistic thing, right? And then after you've had a few days of this, or whatever, how long it takes, I would never go far longer than a week sitting with A, and then drop it, choose B, choose B. B is the only thing that exists. A doesn't even exist. I've chosen B. Again, you don't have to tell anyone, and live with it. Let the implications of it unfold and feel it. And you should get a very, very clear indication of which feels better and which feels worse. And you have to go with the one that feels better. You have to,
Yeah.
no matter what the numbers say, when you pencil out, no matter what the pros and cons lists say, you have to go with the one that feels better. And it's going to make all of the difference in your life. And if your intended becoming is aligned with your true self, then your intuition will take you in that direction.
Fabulous. I love this system that you're describing. I think that it's pragmatic, and it gives you that permission in a way, like not in the moment, because you're kind of like choosing something fully to feel it, like kind of like you're trying on a sweater or something. Like, how does this feel to walk around with this, in my reality of this, and all the choices that are going to come from this, and all the things that are going to be, created from this decision. How does that actually feel to live with that for, like you said, don't go longer than a week? I think that's very reasonable, like to get a real good feel for it. And like the way that you're giving yourself ultimately permission to do both. You're giving yourself permission to change your mind
Mhm.
and choose the thing that actually feels right, right? And choose the thing that feels better after trying it on and giving it a real decent feel for how it goes. And I'll say, like, it's a reasonable thing to take that time with it, because like you said, there's a lot of energy and information that's constantly coming in that can get in the way of our inner knowing and get in the way of our decisions. I know that, like, when you're thinking about making certain decisions, we often are considering other people's reactions, other people's emotions, right? Other people's history and baggage and trauma, that we may have to, that there may be a consequence to our choice, that we're going to have to interact with the world regarding our choice. It
Yep.
doesn't just get to be us, right? In some ways. But what you're describing, and I like that you said both times, like, you don't have to tell anybody. It can be this internal process where you actually check in and see how this sits for you, how this sits in your body, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to live with whatever this choice is. Right? Other
That's
people
right.
will have to live with it too, but you're going to have to live with it. And, we can make choices that, are taking all these other people's feelings into consideration and not taking our own into consideration. And then even if it seems like a good choice, if I'm not sitting well with this, it's not going to work out. It's not going to work out if this is ultimately not aligned for me and not aligned for my evolution. There'll be something that, lets this fall apart, or I won't be actively participating in it. I won't want to be showing up,
Yeah,
and so we have to
absolutely.
have that honesty with ourselves. And sometimes it's not going to feel pleasant. Sometimes, and I tell people this as we're working somatically, because there's this idea like, oh, you're going to feel so relaxed and calm when your nervous system calms down and you feel connected to your body. And it's like, yes, that some of that will happen. That's maybe like, a end goal, or like a attainment of an experience. It's like a high point that we can get to. But what also
Hmm.
happens when we become aware of ourselves is we become aware of the things that are not aligned and the things that don't feel good. And sometimes we have to feel how not good something feels before we can walk away from it, before we
Yeah.
can change directions. We have to, through that contrast, really feel the impact of whatever it is we have been doing or how life has been going, to go, oh, wow, this is really not aligned. This is really not where I want to be. And sometimes that's not what our ego wants to hear. That's not what, it's inconvenient to be
Hmm.
like facing that how we've been living, or a relationship we've had or something, is really been far out of alignment, maybe for a long time, and is going to require an overhaul in our lives, because it's not on mission, right? It's not on purpose. It's not actually part of our evolutionary process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it reminds me that someone was asking me when I was describing this process, how big of a decision can you use this for? And the answer is as big as you're willing to go, right? It's as big as matches your not only uh, I guess sense of taking risks, but also your trust in it, right? You
Mm.
have to build that trust within yourself and within this process, and trusting your gut and your heart. And as an example, I've used it for all the major decisions in my life for about 12 years at least. One of the biggest decisions in my life, I was dating my current partner, Katie, and we had been together for a year. And I had this sense that, first of all, I had an intuitive hit. I had a sense that I was at a decision point with Katie. So I said, okay, well, what? I mean, it was just so strong. I could not ignore it. And so I honored that, and I sat down and went into deep meditation. I said, okay, so what are you going to do? What are your options? What are the things that you're choosing between here? I said, okay, well, my options are, we'd been dating for about a year. My options are break up with her, ask her to move in, do nothing, status quo.
Mm.
And I sat with each of those. Process took me about 2 weeks, and it was very clear. And the interesting thing about that was, and I asked her to move in, by the way, at that time. But the interesting thing was that between the second and third runner-ups, the thing that felt the worst was status quo.
Mm. Mm.
And it was very clear to me that status quo was not a thing that we were going to do. And so, but asking her to move in felt way better than breaking up with her. And so we went that way. And the interesting thing about that is that that powerful initial hit that I had, that it's decision time, came in. She moved in December, I think, of 19, 3 months before a global pandemic hit.
Yeah.
That was a major, major uh, line of demarcation for us. If we had not been together at that time, who knows how that would have
Yeah.
gone? It would have either driven us apart, or we would have had this kind of weird forcing together, like, well, I guess you're here all the time anyway, you know? And, you know, the way it's played out over the last 5 years, she's an amazing partner. I don't think I can ask for better. This, I mean, not only do I love her dearly, and she's a wonderful, passionate, loving, kind, compassionate person, and I'm very in love with her, but like, who's going to travel the world with me like this? You know, that we've chosen a life that would drive a lot of people nuts, and she's so on board, and she's just been an amazing partner, and we're able to engage in this because of that. And,
Mm.
you know, that's because I was able to follow my intuition, and that's a big, big decision. And I did the same thing for walking out of my corporate job 5 years ago to
Yeah.
start the evolutionary. I put it through that test, and I was like, there was no way I could stay in the job.
Yeah.
It was once you get really honest with yourself like this, it was an impossibility. I literally couldn't
Yes.
stay in the job.
Yes. I love hearing your process about this. I think that people who are listening are going to be curious to kind of try this on. And, you know, those intuitive hits that we get that are, you know, we don't know the full picture yet. But as you said, then you see like, oh, 3 months later, it's like there's this thing that happens that maybe my system was already picking up on something. We don't know what's
Mhm.
going to occur. And it can go that way with like when we let go of something or when we make a decision that, you know, stops what we previously were doing. And now there's like a hole in our lives where something was that's not there anymore. Right. And we don't exactly know sometimes what's going to, you know, like you said, ideally we can replace it and fill that space, but sometimes we don't know. And that can be a source of panic and frustration and uncertainty. But there's that trust that we can develop with ourselves that there's an opening now for something to come in or some space in
Mhm.
my life that's going to get filled. And, you know, what am I gonna ask the universe to fill that with? What am I gonna invite into that space that now exists in my life? You know, and so kind of thinking about like what the pandemic was and how you got that intuitive hit, something there's going to be some reason right now that it's important to make this choice, right? And like being able to be open to the mystery of that and make those decisions and, you know, allow for those changes to occur even when we don't know the future, even when we don't know how it's going to play out, right? And I think that goes back to this idea of trust and trusting ourselves, right? And trusting our holographic universe.
Yeah, absolutely. All of that. And also trusting that it has something to do with that it's important for our evolutionary process.
Mm.
And our evolutionary process is important for the evolutionary process of our species. Because if you take this idea of intuition and you apply it to evolution, ask how does this relate to it? It relates in a couple of interesting ways. First of all, it's a tool that we can use to navigate our evolution and accelerate us toward that intended becoming.
Mm.
So it gets us on that path and gets us moving towards it. But it's also the outcome of that process.
Yeah.
So as we develop our intuition to help us move toward our evolution, part of our evolution becomes the development of our intuition. And the reason that intuition is an important part of our evolution as an individual is so that we can live our best life. Our best life is the best way that we can evolve the species.
Yeah.
And what does an evolved human look like? When I think about this, the only thing that I can think of that really would make a difference in terms of how we express as a species, capabilities as a species, is that we evolve into the highest form of intuition that I can think of.
Mm.
And that is that we come into experiential knowing, full apprehension, direct apprehension of our connectedness.
Mm. Mm.
So we become a species who no longer talks about it, who no longer thinks of it as some theoretical construct, our connectedness, or we study it in quantum physics, but we don't really know how it's going, how this is working with us, right? We see little clues here and there. No, we absolutely 100% perceive it. It's not a question for any
Right.
of us. And that's the next level of human. That's an ascended human who perceives their connectedness with each other and with
Mm.
the greater fields in which we're embedded, like, for instance, nature, right? For instance, Mother Gaia. the universe, the solar system, the galaxy, and so forth. And so the thing that happens is when that happens, we no longer like going to war doesn't
Mhm.
make any sense. I would no longer punch you in the face than I would gouge my own eye out. We're the
Mhm.
same thing. So just like that, we stop warring, we stop violence, and well, what happens then? Look at the resource allocation of the human species. Look at the focus of money, of time, attention, of genius that we put on weapons,
Yeah.
on building bombs, on building better bombs that are more destructive. Well, what if we shifted all of that to within a generation, we'd have free energy,
Mm.
we'd have gravitation control, we would be out instead of mining the earth for the minerals that we need, we'd be mining asteroids that are just flying along through space anyway. And ultimately, we'd be birthed to the stars.
Mm.
We would be able to do that. Think about what's holding us back. Look at all of the resources that we're putting into controlling each other and
Right.
killing each other. We shift that into these things that are actually going to be beneficial for humanity and for the planet. And that is going to happen instantly because
Right.
humans are effing amazing.
Yeah.
So this to me constitutes the next level of humanity is when we're able to develop our intuition to the point to where we can sense and
Mm.
really have that experiential knowing of our
Mm.
connectedness.
I love it. Yes, and it's very much aligned with, the person who created my modality, Thomas Hanna talks about the new human, that's mutating into this full awareness of sensing and feeling, beyond the five senses or beyond like, our typical awareness, or really, when I say typical, it's like the awareness that's available when we are trapped in our fight or flight, which is the survival mode that humanity has been living under. And so there's so much here that I can see, as you're speaking about this vision that you have of the world that you see that's possible, right? That you're aligning to, that you're practicing aligning to that vision, right? It's happening in, as above, so below, as within, so without. When we start focusing on how we're spending our resources, kind of looping back around to those ideas of what am I spending my time doing? What am I spending my time focusing on? What am I taking responsibility for in my body and in my life that, I'm looking at my shit and I'm dealing with my shit so that as it, vibrates out into the rest of this world, we're moving in that direction. We're moving in the direction of the new human that you described, who is interconnected and aware and, unconsciously taking those actions and unconsciously building those positive habits that are the things that are going to transform this world, So I think this has been such an amazing conversation. I would love for people to know more about, your podcast. So maybe you can take a moment to tell people about like where they can find more amazing conversations with you. And also about maybe just say a little bit about the format of your podcast because it's really unique. I hadn't been on a podcast like that before.
Yeah, cool. So the Evolutionary is available on all of the major platforms. I'm thinking about paring down a little bit. I push out to all of them at the moment. So you can go in there and search the Evolutionary. If that doesn't show up, put in my name as well, and it will certainly show up. Spotify, Apple, Google, you name it, it's there. And that's the audio only. Back in the beginning of this year, I shifted over to focusing more on a video format and started doing these live streams. And so we live stream on Facebook and YouTube. And both of those, the handle is The Evolutionary Life. So facebook.com/The Evolutionary Life and youtube.com/ at symbol The Evolutionary Life will get you there. And obviously, I would love it if you subscribe to my YouTube channel. And what we started doing was we started to do a live stream / after party. Okay, so we do the live stream and we have people that join on the Zoom call, but then it's also live streaming on those two platforms. And then the people on the Zoom call get to stay on when we end the live stream. And then we have a more interactive last half of the show. And Amy, you did this and it was absolutely brilliant. You answered some questions that people had about their bodily pain and discomfort and walked us through some exercises. It was wonderful. I've had a human design expert on who did readings for people. We had a death cafe
Mm.
where well, it's like technically called the death salon, where we went around and everyone shared about, I think there was a dozen of us on that call in the after party, and everyone shared about how death is showing up in their lives. And it was all, there was no judgment. There was no trying to solve anyone's problems. We were just kind of holding
Yeah.
space and processing. And it was really a beautiful one, and on and on. And so this is the format that I've come up with that is really nourishing and a whole lot of fun. And they're not all going to be like that. I'm probably going to have some scientific people on pretty soon that we might forego the after party because they don't really have an activity to engage in, right? But then, I have some woo-woo people on. I had a channeler on, and she answered a bunch of questions as while channeling. That was super fun. We're probably going to have a friend of hers on pretty soon who is a galactic starseed, and she's going to answer some questions too in the after party. So it's a super fun format, and it's really engaging. And yeah, and the way that you can do that, and if you want to get a hold of me, of course, you can go to the website, which is theevolutionary.life, because .com is so last season, no offense to freeyoursoma.com. That's theevolutionary.life. And you can sign up to get our newsletter there. You can also become a member. All of the after parties get posted in the members area, and we're building a nice library there of super cool content.
Awesome. Yes, check them out. In the show notes, you'll find all that information there. Highly recommend the podcast. I've been listening, and it's fascinating. And you've been doing it a while, so there's kind of like a fair amount of content with like lots of different subjects. There's also some solo casts that you've done that really talk about, even go deeper into some of the concepts that we explored today. So check it out. Follow David, and thank you again for coming on and having this incredible conversation with me. It's been such a great connection.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Thanks for having me on the show. This has been super fun.
Hey there, friend. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I would love to hear your thoughts. Follow me on Instagram at Amy Takaya and send me a DM about this episode. I'd like to thank you for being part of this somatic revolution. And if you'd like to support the podcast and help more people learn about somatics, consider leaving a review or a rating. And finally, if you'd like to have the experience of relief in your tight hips or back and learn to understand what your body is really saying to you, visit youcanfreeyoursoma.com. I can't wait to share with you what is truly possible. Bye for now.